tell you people, hey, revolution rising. Yeah, yeah. Proof is, watch out. us to run around. They're giving us the run around. Don't think that we're too happy in this world of material things. Don't think that we're lost in some cyberspace. They think we can't find a way to blaze a light. Tell them we're about to burn these plantations down. They're giving you the run around. They're giving us the run around. Giving us the run around. They're giving us the run around. So when you think you know what's going down, it's just lies disguised as news. The truth lies between the lines, but you gotta be quick to catch it. But when you think that you understand, and you think that you really know what's going on, let me tell you, they're giving us the run around. They're giving us the run around. We're giving us the run around. They're giving us the run around.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Braw.
My name is Philip Stevens.
I'm a writer for Political and Newsweek, and I'm also working on a book. And Philip is a foreign affairs columnist for the Financial Times. We're here to talk about the future of the euro. And if I may quote Aristotle Onassis, who once said, "When people say you can achieve anything with money, you can be sure they've never had any." So I'm sure Greece could do with a bit of extra money, and in the early hours of this morning, Parliament voted to approve some of the reforms that Greece's lenders have asked for. But at the same time, we're seeing a much more dramatic crisis, which is the migrant crisis. So how do you think these crises compare, or are they interlinked?
Well, I think it seems, it often seems as if Europe can only deal with one crisis at a time. During the first half of this year, the euro was barely, and Greece's problems were barely off the front pages and the news bulletins and the web. Now, since the summer, the migrants crisis has taken over, and I think quite a lot of people have been lulled into a rather false sense of security about the Eurozone. Greece, the Syriza government is pressing ahead with difficulty, but it is introducing some tough measures. But the problems of the euro, I think, are not just problems about Greece. They're the problems of a currency zone which has very slow growth, in lots of places very high unemployment, and doesn't have the political, if you like, union which allows the zone to support the weaker economies while promoting growth across Europe. So, and there's a bit of, I think, as well, a sort of economic and political race. Look across Europe, you see populist parties rising everywhere, given a further boost by the migrant crisis, if you want to call it that. But economics are still at the root cause of a lot of Europe's problems.
Yes, and speaking of the changing voting patterns in Europe, we just had an election in Poland which saw the Law and Justice Party win parliamentary elections. How do you think that will influence the Eurozone? Because presumably it sets Poland's Euro adoption back.
Well, I think in practical terms, Poland was always a number of years away from wanting to join the euro, although it sort of pledged in theory its willingness or its wish to join. I think the broader problem that Europe has is summed up in the question, will the centre hold? Mm-hmm. If you look across Europe, you see a splintering and a bit of a polarization of politics, with parties of the right and of the far right and parties of the left and the far left splintering away support from the more centrist parties of Europe. And that's again to do with high unemployment, the absence of growth, frozen or falling living standards. And as you said, the migrant crisis, if you want to call it that, has come on top of that. And now people already feeling sore about their economic circumstances are beginning to feel worried about what some see as an influx from the Middle East, from Syria in particular.
And I think it's fair to say that the EU wasn't prepared for this sort of crisis. And in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, the Swedish government announced that it has essentially run out of space to house the expected 180,000 or 190,000 asylum seekers who will arrive this year, and it has asked the migration agency to order or buy 185 tents, which sort of shows you, I think, or shows us the extent of the crisis if a country has to buy tents for migrants. And I was wondering, do you think the migrant crisis is actually the worst crisis of the two?
I think, as you said, Europe didn't look prepared. It should have been prepared, because this hasn't just happened this summer. If you look back 2 or 3 years, there's been this steady flow of refugees in particular across the Mediterranean. And what's happened over the summer is that it's accelerated greatly, but European governments shouldn't have been taken by surprise. But I think we learned during the Euro crisis that political action, political will, seems now in Europe to depend on crisis. Governments actually acted when the euro looked as if it was going to fracture and break up. Once they'd solved that particular problem, they sat back. I think with migration we've seen something of the same, that there's a certain unwillingness to confront the hard decisions, the hard questions, until the problem has almost overwhelmed us. And then people push back. But I'm not sure that we've yet, or European leaders have yet got control over the migration problem.
Now, the EU Commissioner for the Euro, Valdis Dombrovskis, said just this afternoon in a panel discussion that there's a blending of fiscal and security matters, and that it would be irresponsible to look at the euro crisis in isolation. Do you agree with his assessment that there is a blending of fiscal and security matters that the EU has to respond to?
Well, I think in all these issues, there's an interlocking, and you could say, look, people in Europe are particularly sensitive about migration because of the economic hardships of the past few years, because many governments have been imposing austerity policies. So in a way, there is an obvious sort of blending, a connection between the two. But I think, and Europe does have to learn to deal with more than one problem as a whole at once. But I mean, if you look at migration, although it does, many people say, look, we're being overwhelmed by migration. If you look at it, we're talking about, say it's 1 million people or 1.5 million people on a continent of 500 million people. So in objective terms, we should be able to deal with this, particularly if you look at the problem that Turkey, Jordan, and others have had to deal with.
And that Europe had to deal with after World War II.
Yes, absolutely. Then in Germany alone, you were talking about 5 or 6 million people, displaced people, over a period of years. So I think where the euro and migration problems run into each other is that people are, electors, voters, already feeling sore, already wanting to, if you like, throw up the barriers against the outside world. There's an anti-globalization track here as well. And I think the populists across the continent have exploited fears, exploited that soreness, that anger with austerity, to paint this as a question of identity, and it's surely not.
Yeah. I wanted to bring up briefly Hungary, which, as we all know, has put up a fence and has slashed the number of migrants it receives. I think it's down to 9 or 10 per day now, from several thousand per day. And I wonder if the migrant crisis has also, as far as you can tell, created divisions within the EU and also between the countries that have not yet joined the euro but were saying they would. And so how does the migrant crisis, do you think, affect the future of the euro and the country's aspirations to join it?
Well, I think you're right that the old question of solidarity has come up again, and a number of people in the west of the continent, in Germany in particular, but also in France and also in Britain, have looked at countries like Hungary and said, well, look, Europe is about, the European Union is about solidarity. And if you want to count it in money terms, if you look at Hungary's infrastructure spending, 90% of it is financed by the European Union. Yeah. But I think Mr. Orban, who's, as we know, is an admirer, a self-confessed admirer of Vladimir Putin, only this year gave a speech saying he preferred illiberal democracy to liberal democracy, is something of an exception. There are clearly sensitivities in Central and Eastern Europe about migration, but we've seen here in Riga, in Latvia, that the government here has shown solidarity by saying, yes, it will accept a share of the migrants coming in. But all these pressures, I think, do run into each other. The pressures, the economic pressures, the migration pressures, some of the trade pressures we're talking here about in terms of TTIP, they tend to converge. What Europe has to do is learn to see the connections and deal with them at once.
Yeah. It's also interesting, I think, that the euro doesn't seem to have the same aspirational aura that it used to have maybe 5 years ago. If a country like Poland can more or less openly say, well, let's not do it now, or maybe ever, but they're at least saying that we're not going to do it now, whereas it wasn't that long ago where the euro was the stated goal of almost every new EU member state.
I think that's right. I think what we need to understand is, although governments of the eurozone, led by Germany, have survived successive crises, they haven't yet put the euro on a sound footing. We had this year a report, the so-called Five Presidents report, setting out the sort of economic and political integration that was still necessary if we're going to look at the euro as a currency that's sustainable and secure over decades. That includes, for example, completion of a banking union, much more coordinated, integrated fiscal policies. And I think those countries outside the euro are really looking in, saying, well, look, it's not the time to join. Let's see if France, Germany, Italy, Spain actually manage over the next few years to complete that process of political and economic integration. And if they do, then we'll join. And in a funny way, actually, I think the biggest test for the euro is not Greece, it's not Spain or Ireland, it's France. The real question, I think, for the euro is whether in the next few years, probably post the 2017 election, France can get its economy in a strong enough shape to do the deal with Germany on political union.
And you work for the Financial Times, you're based in London, and another looming question is the question of Brexit. So how would that affect the euro, a potential Brexit affect the euro?
Well, yes, that's another. We've talked about migration, about the euro. We also have Ukraine as a crisis, a big subject of conversation here. And then the British government, just to make it even more difficult for everyone, says it's going to hold a referendum about leaving the European Union. I think it is a danger. I think at the moment, most people in Britain would say, look, Britain in the end will decide to stay in because it's sensible, intelligent. But I think there is a risk that the populism takes hold and people see the referendum as a free vote against the government, against globalization. I mean, I think in this, you spoke earlier about sort of the euro was seen as an example for the rest. Well, 10 or 15 years ago, Europe, the European Union, was seen as a model for the rest of the world. It was, the Americans had cruise missiles, but we had what the experts called normative power. People would want to copy us, be like us. Well, we've spent 5 or more years now in retreat. Were Britain to leave the European Union, I think it would accelerate that process. So, I think this is a moment for Europe, it's a moment for Britain. It would be disastrous for Britain to leave, but it would also be very bad, I think, for the rest of the European Union. Yes,
and what contributes to the instability that we're seeing, I think, is protest voting, and we saw that in to some extent in the election of Jeremy Corbyn as Labour leader. And so, do you think there is a risk that people, just to make a point against the British establishment, would vote for a Brexit?
Well, I think there is this very broad undercurrent of discontent brought about by economic austerity, but also a disenchantment with political elites. And there's always a danger in referendums that people vote for something else. We saw a little while ago, a few years ago, when France voted against a European treaty, it wasn't about the treaty, it was a protest vote.
Yeah.
I think it would be incredibly foolish for British voters to see this as a protest vote. But you never know, and if Europe were to move back into economic crisis next year, if we saw another influx of migrants and European governments struggling to get a grip on the situation, then it is a danger, it always is.
Yeah. And you mentioned Ukraine earlier, and on the face of it, it has nothing to do with the euro, really, but still, it's another crisis that the EU has to deal with. Do you think there is a risk that it will distract European leaders from dealing with the euro, or that it will affect the eurozone in other ways?
I don't think it's a question of distraction, but all these issues are about the cohesion of Europe, about the self-confidence of Europe and solidarity of Europe. So the way I would look at it is that Europe has to deal with its own problems, particularly the euro, but also deal with the difficult British and try and persuade the British to stay in. And by sort of re-establishing sort of inner strength, then confront the challenges from Russia in Ukraine, from the Middle East, where we've really had nothing to say about a political settlement in Syria. So we need to look outwards again, but we need to do so from a base where we're actually our politicians are beginning to regain control of their domestic agendas, including the euro.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the two interlocking crises we've been talking about, the migrant crisis and the euro crisis, obviously affect different parts of the EU, because some countries that receive large numbers of migrants, primarily Sweden, are not members of the eurozone. And I was wondering how you think that will affect the setup of the EU when there are several crises that affect different parts of the Union, and yet they have to somehow work in solidarity with each other.
Well, I think we are seeing a Europe now which, again, to use the phrase of you hear in Brussels a lot, of variable geometry, where different groups of countries, whether it's the Euro group, whether it's those countries most willing to act overseas, get together and work in their own groups. But I think on certain issues, and this is part of the discussion with Britain about its membership, I think on economic, although the Eurozone has to set policy for the currency area, there is also the broader economic policy for Europe, which has to be orientated towards growth. I think on the question of migration, there's the Schengen and there's a few countries outside Schengen. But again, we have to look at these as challenges for the European Union, not just for one country or another.
And very briefly, how do you think these crises have shifted the balance, and have they shifted the balance of power between the European Commission and the member states?
I think we've seen through the Euro crisis, and in particular in the role that Germany has taken, Angela Merkel has taken in the Euro crisis, that power has shifted back to member states. I think the Commission, probably rightly, is taking a rather more modest role in terms of legislation in Europe. But there's always a balancing act. The Commission is at its strongest when governments feel self-confidence. If you go back to the 1980s, where you had a powerful Helmut Kohl, a powerful François Mitterrand, they were prepared to see Brussels under Jacques Delors take the initiative. When governments feel weaker, they tend to try and draw back powers from Brussels.
Thank you very much, Philip, and thank you very much for watching.